Okay, so the first question is basically what you're proposing is to have a carbon price implemented in major economies because you basically argue that that has a lot of benefits. How feasible, in spite of all these benefits, do you think that such a measure would be? How feasible would that be politically? How acceptable do you think major economies are towards that?
First of all, let me start with a very fundamental question. Are there any reasons why a finance minister or an economic minister in a major economy should be interested in imposing a price tag on CO2 even if he or she is not interested in the climate change and the climate externality? And my answer is, this is the most important question. And I would say yes, because imposing a tax on CO2 or a price on CO2 can have a lot of benefits because you have revenues. With these revenues, you can reduce other taxes like the labor taxes or capital taxes. You can reduce the debt. Or for many economies, it's quite important, you can invest in infrastructure. So we are at the beginning of an infrastructure boost in many, many countries. And in that sense, I would say it has a benefit. What I do not claim is that with such a price level, which could be beneficial simply because of revenues recycling, so we will not solve the climate problem. But what I am claiming is it's a good starting point.
Okay, but you know, my question was basically that related to this basic issue, as you say, finance ministers do have a very strong incentive to do this. The problem is, what about the prime minister and his popularity? The question is, this morning during the press conference, the most important question was, what is going to be the impact of this on households? That's what I mean.
Yeah, I fully understand your point, but what is the impact on the households if you reduce the other taxes, or even if you do revenue recycling, or you make your economy much more attractive so that you can have inflow of international capital? This could be indeed economically very beneficial. But I would also argue that the CO2 price or the CO2 tax is by no means politically costless. It's not a free lunch for a politician, for a prime minister. But in the end, the prime minister has to explain to the public what's the alternative. If the prime minister can explain the alternative are higher taxes on labor, are less revenues and higher debt burden for the future, so he or she might succeed.
Okay, and what about how difficult do you think it is to coordinate major economies towards this thing that may be interesting for them as such, but then of course it can have some competitiveness concerns?
I fully agree. So even in Europe at the EU Commission, so we had on the last day a huge debate about the 2030 target, and competitiveness is now on the table. That's for sure. But nevertheless, so you can alleviate and mitigate this competitiveness issue if you run a tax and an expenditure policy which is able to attract fresh capital, in particular for economies like China, for example, because then infrastructure investments can make their investments much more attractive. And by the way, the local air pollution problem will become in China one of the major challenges to attract new capital, foreign direct investments and new firms, and they have to deal with that. So in that sense, I'm slightly optimistic.
Okay, thank you very much.